Well, hi everyone. Welcome everyone back to the Red Room. My name's Harger, and I'm the Artistic Director of Lighthouse, a digital culture agency based in Brighton. I've got the enormous responsibility and great pleasure of introducing the final session of this year's FutureEverything conference. And in many ways, we really genuinely have saved the best for last. Because this session, which is really going to try and sort of, if you want, map out the weather conditions of the near future, features three of the most brilliant and insightful thinkers on the future that I know, Nicolas, Scott Smith, and Justin Pickard. Today, we're going to sort of bring the festival and our summit to a bit of a culmination by doing something a bit different. So rather than give three separate presentations, what these guys are going to do is a keynote in three voices. So what Nicola and Scott and Justin have prepared for us is a journey through some of the features of the landscape of the near future in a collaborative presentation. It's going to be intentionally improvisational and conversational because we think that it's in those in-between, if you want, conversant spaces that the near future really lies. So let me introduce our three tour guides to the near future. And let's start with Scott. So Scott Smith is a futurist, researcher, and analyst from the States. He's the founder and head of Changeist, a futures research lab, and a partner at Platform, a foresight and design strategy group. He also co-founded and now leads the Duke Tip Futures Institute, and is a writer for Quartz and Current Intelligence. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Scott really is one of the most essential people to be listening and following if you want to also detect weak signals about technological change. Nicolas Nova, in the middle, is a writer and design ethnographer based in Switzerland. He's the founder of the Near Future Laboratory, a design studio that creates extraordinary projects and propositions that exist in the slippery space between design, art, and technology. He also teaches design in Geneva, and I got to know Nicola through the LIFT conference, which he helps curate. And I think by anybody's measure, LIFT is one of the most exhilarating and delightful conference experiences that can be had anywhere. So it's really a great privilege to be introducing him this time, rather than vice versa. So welcome, Nicola. Justin Pickard is a writer, researcher, and what he calls a gonzo futurist, currently based in Brighton. He's an associate at the speculative design company Superflux and is currently working on a PhD in science and technology policy at the University of Sussex. His academic work focuses on the uncertainties brought about by climate change, but his writing outside academia, for example in the New Scientist art magazine, ranges more widely. Justin's an extremely acute observer of how technology is changing society and subsequently frequently pops my brain on Twitter. I'd like to think that the future is a little bit like the multiverse of cosmology and that all possible versions of itself exist right now. So trying to understand or predict which of these manifestations of all those possible futures might come into being is, as a physicist would say, if not impossible, then very, very hard. But there really aren't three people more qualified to try. So please help me in welcoming Scott, Nicola, and Justin.
Thanks so much. I'm Scott, if you couldn't figure out which of us was which, and I'll be kind of getting things rolling. As Honor said accurately, this is going to be a little bit of a different session. There's three of us. We work together in various forms. We talk together pretty much nonstop if you're on Twitter, and kind of end up sharing and opening and finishing sentences together. So hopefully this will have a little bit of that flow to it. But in the interest of kind of getting stories started, we'll go in a little bit of a sequence, at least to kick it off, and it might break out a little bit karaoke after that. But This has been an amazing 2 days. This is an event that I've watched from a distance for quite a long time. And there's so many really fascinating topics that have emerged. So I think we have a task of trying to pull a number of those threads together and kind of take them a little bit, as Honor said, into the near future. Diagnose a little bit, but then sort of talk about what we can actually do, because at the end, this is partly a design conference, this is partly an arts conference. People who are here do things and make things happen. And I think that's increasingly sort of what we need to deal with. But I wanted to sort of start off by just framing the problem a little bit. I've been a practicing, if you can be such a thing, consulting futurist for about the past decade. And a lot of that requires sort of on-the-ground problem solving, not beard stroking and pontificating and sort of blue sky forecasting, as much as actually trying to get to a point of action, trying to make things happen, make things different. But really in the past probably 18 months to 2 years, I found myself sliding towards this role of being more critical futurist, in the sense that trying to step back a little bit from the work and look at what we're talking about. What's the mood? What's the sort of, what's kicking around in the public psyche? What's society thinking about? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's indicative of a point we've come to and a kind of level of tension that's rising and it pretty well agreed to be. This is actually a t-shirt. It's kind of like Been to the Future got the shirt. This is a shirt you can order from, I think, Threadless, at least in the US, and I have a very torn up version. See, there we go. The future's dead. But I'll carry on anyway. So I think this is quite indicative of a mood that's sort of emerged. And this is not the only place we've seen this. The reason someone makes a t-shirt is because it grabs a little bit of the zeitgeist that's out there. In teeny tiny print, it basically says, "Where is my jetpack?" which of course is the bane of our professional existence, because people typically ask you that immediately. Where's my jetpack? Where's my hover car? We swear at them, some obscenities, turn them around and send them back in a different direction. But it kind of sums up the mood. And this isn't the first time this has happened. Actually, I want to see if I can play a little bit of video that's 41 years old today. And you probably will, maybe some of you who are old enough will recognize there's a little bit of audio on this.
In the course of my work, which takes me to just about every corner of the globe, I see many aspects of a phenomenon which I'm just beginning to understand. Our modern technology has achieved a degree of sophistication beyond our wildest dreams, but this technology has exacted a pretty heavy price. We live in an age of anxiety, a time of stress, and with all our sophistication, we are in fact the victims of our own technological strength. We are the victims of shock, of future shock.
If anybody recognize this gentleman? Yeah, it's Orson Welles. This is the film version of Alvin Toffler's Future Shock, made. The book was written in 1970, and this film was released in 1972. And it's hilarious because he's kind of describing the same things we might be saying as we were flying into this event. You know, he's on the conveyor belt at Heathrow, talking about how in his travels today he begins to sense out there in society a certain shock, a shock of the new, a future shock. Things are coming at us too quickly, and so it's kind of putting in this strange and ill mental state. That I think Venkat described as, the future nauseous. That all of these pieces that we've been talking about, smart cities, algorithms, robots, etc., are coming at us, drones, and it gives us sort of a certain sense of dread. And about probably this time last year, maybe a little bit later, Warren Ellis spoke at, I believe it was Improving. He is, many of you may know him. He's a writer, he's an artist, he's a lot of things. He's quite inspiring if you sort of follow him on a day-to-day basis. But he stood up to basically talk about something that he called the science fiction condition. And what he meant by that was something that has been cast a little bit differently by a U.S. comedian who says, everything's great and nobody's happy. And I think what Warren was talking about was how, think about it for a moment. We had, I think at that moment, 7 people orbiting over our heads in space. We had these amazing mobile phones in our pockets. We have all of the sort of trinkets of advancement in technology. And yet, is anybody happy? And what he was trying to get at, I think, a little bit was, well, maybe we should not simply cheer up, but realize that we are living in a science fiction condition, and perhaps we should look at some of those tools as a means of exploring not only how to get happy again, but how to move forward and how to solve some of the problems that we still have that our beautiful, shiny trinkets don't really solve. So, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, these were all still kind of rhetorical topics, but something weird has happened in the past year or two that as we look around us, we see news stories, macroeconomists talking in major newspapers around the world about whether robots are going to take our jobs. This is a century-old topic, but suddenly now everyone's sweating and feeling that nausea about it. We have gone from drones being something that only we would joke about to, I think, about this time last week, Adam Greenfield pointed out that there were 4 stories on the front page of the New York Times website regarding drones. So we suddenly go from Gibson's extremely undistributed future to this moment of super density where it's staring us in the face. So we haven't really had a lot of time to adjust. And then this comes along. 3 months ago, a discussion about virtual reality would have seemed like it was a decade old. A discussion about augmented reality would seem like it was one of those kind of hot or not things that had peaked a little bit and then was sort of fading out. I had a few fans here and there, but we're not really sure what was going to happen with it. And then suddenly we get glass. And we don't just get glass, we get Google introducing this amazing new technology that's basically a computer and all of the Googleplex concentrated into your own and sort of semi-integrated into your own senses. Were we happy about it? No, there was like a hot moral panic rippled immediately through society. Every blog post, every article, what about privacy? What about the male gaze? What about Dazzle? And how can I avoid surveillance? We immediately kind of went to this long, long list of all the ills that this would bring us. And as you can see, she's laughing. She's having a wonderful time. And if you've looked at the videos, yeah, she has no salad, but she's laughing alone. And if you've looked at the videos that Google wants to soften you up with here, everything's beautiful, right? Use cases that I'm sure we can all sympathize with on a day-to-day basis: hot air balloons, playing the ukulele for our partner on her birthday or his birthday, stuff that happens all the time. And so, but and this is going somewhere. It kind of is meant to sprinkle some fairy dust on you and basically give you an idea that this, what you in your gut perceive as a very unsettling, slightly nauseous technology advancement is something that's actually, don't mind, everything's cool. To summarize something that Honor brought up earlier today, Timo Arnold's brilliant post last week about invisible interfaces. This is an invisible future. Not to worry, everything will be cool. But at the same time that we've got, glass, those of you who may be Charlie Brooker fans here in the UK, we have to pirate it in other countries. We have something like Black Mirror that simultaneously is rolling out this vision of the future as dystopic, right? That's a useful word. But if you talk to, or if you've read anything that Brooker has said, he described this as actually being about 5 minutes from now. So again, that future that used to be at a safe distance from us is kind of, while we weren't looking, sort of crept closer and closer. And this is how we express ourselves. So this is, a psychoanalyst would probably say something very symptomatic about what's going on in our subconscious. We'll see if it'll come up here. I don't know if you've seen this. If you haven't, I need a one-word reaction. This is Boston Dynamics Big Dog robot. This is what Big Dog has learned how to do in the past few months. It's gone from being a functioning, autonomous, semi-autonomous robotic system to being able to pick up a cinder block, a breeze block, and throw it.
And a lot of the way it's been marketed and approached thus far is posited as something that's just like infrastructure. So you are a soldier or someone exploring an environment, and it's just going to follow you around and carry your bags. And then suddenly it comes back, and it's got an arm for a head, and it's tossing bricks around. What does that mean? What's going on here?
So these are the things that keep us up at night. But also, we're not just us, we're you. And we also feel that sort of level of disturbance. When you see something like that, here's this really cute robot, oh my God, it can throw a breeze block at my head. We have to kind of stop and figure out, where are we here? And, oh, by the way, we might need to kind of step back into the picture and not just kind of happily sit back. So one sort of road that we can go down is, if you've ever kind of read anything that I rant about, is this idea of disappearing down the road of the future and kind of forecasting a prediction is a weird form of fan fiction. And I tend to kind of take a view of a certain section of my probably peers, as engaging a little bit in this, in the sense that they advocate sort of aspirational futures, basically writing themselves or writing all of us into a picture that is solely where everything turns out all right, and everything's great, and everybody's happy. But it becomes a dangerous refuge. And it's the idea of sort of using fiction and narratives, I think, is quite important, but we have to be careful not to fall very quickly into the trap of getting into fan fiction and writing ourselves into worlds that we would like to have happen. Come on. Science fiction is one of the tools Warren talked about at the Science Fiction Condition. Neil Stephenson has talked about this, who wrote Cryptonomicon and other sort of famous sci-fi books, about can we take something like science fiction as a tool and leverage it as something that we can use to experiment with and put ourselves in simulated environments. But it should be a sandbox, a safe place to play, but not necessarily be an end in itself, a place to disappear into. So science fiction, great, interesting tool as well, but it also has some sharp edges to it that I think we'll talk a bit more about. And then there's this kind of naughty beast that's the emerging genre of technology videos that are used to introduce us to the amazing new innovations that we see on a daily basis. We've actually, Justin and I taught together last summer, and we can spend half a day going through them almost like film critics. And looking at, what's being said here, how do you fit in here, what is the message here? And now that we've moved into this world of sort of beautiful screens everywhere, we have the problem of not really knowing kind of what's behind that screen. There's a Corning video called A Day Made of Glass that you may have seen. Think about that statement for a moment. A day made of glass. An entire world swept clean of all the artifacts that you have in your daily life and completely replaced with beautiful, smooth, fingerprint-free, no smudge glass, all of which has, with no visible circuitry, beautiful interaction and functionality built into it. And so like the robots, like Big Dog, like drones, we're beginning to sort of experience these beautiful new glass interfaces that, even this one is empty. There's nothing there except happy people. And a hole. There's a hole. Maybe it's a magic hole, but it's the blankness of it to me sort of gives cause to have a little bit of concern. The last time that we pointed up at glass and hoped that there was something really great on the other side of it was about 500, 600, 700 years ago. And to me, there's a direct parallel between the way that we're now sort of worshiping glass again, as we were told to do in the Middle Ages. Stay calm, keep calm, and everything on the other side of the glass will be fine. So, again, another issue. We're kind of being lured into these things. So we've run into what I'm calling basically flat pack futures, kind of IKEA futures that are cheap, They're convenient, they're stacked high, they're sold inexpensively. They might or might not come with meatballs with horse in it. But they're surely missing a hex key without which to put together, and it may or may not be something that fits into your life and your home. And this is what we have to kind of be aware of. And what I'm kind of talking about here is bringing agency back. It was spoken about in the last panel. It's a word that's crept up and come up over and over again, this idea of agency. And so I think that one of the messages that I want to get across is retaking agency in our own roles and sort of building and modeling and forecasting our own futures. Otherwise, we end up like these lovely people on Space Mountain at Disney, where you get in, you're strapped in, the bar comes down, you're told to keep your hands and feet inside the future, and you go off for this wonderful ride that's been completely predetermined. And this is kind of what we're talking about trying to escape. And big data is another issue that's come up in the last couple of days. Big data is fantastic, except, and it scales, but it might not tell us anything. It might not represent you. Carlo made some fantastic assertions here in the last panel about what we can really learn from data and what we can learn from the absence of data. So I would sort of flag big data as one of those things like glass and like some of these other representations that we have to look out for as well. And finally, futures have consequences. We talk about things like the cloud. We talk about invisible interfaces. We talk about amazing futures that are shiny and beautiful and will solve every problem for us. But somewhere, someone has to dig a hole to build the infrastructure to make that thing happen. So as we're out thinking about how we can sort of give our souls up to the cloud and have problems solved for us, some other place they're having to dig a trench to lay a cable to build a data center that may or may not have certain data privacy regulations, et cetera. And there probably won't be jobs for you or your kids or your neighbors in engineering the other end of that future. So that's another one of the kind of sharp edges we have to look out for. And it leaves us trying to kind of hack our way into Morozov safe, which you may or may not have heard him talk about in the past week, where we kind of hide all the digital technologies that could otherwise be a distraction for us. We disappear into this kind of fan fiction trying to find our way in, or abdicate the narrative completely and give it up to people who would like to create a different future for you. It could be someone like UKIP, it could be someone like the Tea Party, who here are happily riding segways in their manufactured past future that may or may not involve us. But that's kind of where it puts us. So that's sort of my sort of opening framing of the problem, and I will wear my tinfoil hat while I pass it over to Nicolas.
Okay. Well, I have nothing to say about that one, except that it's a funny one. So I'm going to be back to what Scott just presented about this kind of motto, where's my jetpack? This kind of question that we hear about. And I feel kind of guilty because probably 4 years ago at LIFT, that was somehow the theme of the conference. Well, not exactly where's my jetpack, but something like where did the future go, or something like this. And since then, we saw a lot of things like this kind of book and conferences, events about this kind of question that somehow, and I will have to do this kind of thing, that leads to some sort of anxiousness about the inability to predict or plan the future. And it's interesting that Scott mentioned Neil Stephenson, because as a science fiction writer and a person interested in innovation, he wrote a column, I think it was a year ago, about the lack of big project in technological innovation, and he started this project called Hieroglyph that is supposed to put together science fiction writers, people interested in the future, designers, engineers, as a way to form some sort of new representation of futuristic technologies and words that can inspire people to go back to research and development and probably try and invest their time and energy into building something that can be learned from those fictions. And it's going to be like, okay. And it's interesting also to see how science fiction over time keeps repeating certain tropes that also inspire people. So I call that ghost futures or ghost technologies from the future. So you have robots like this. You have the idea that things should be automated. And for this, that's annoying. I take this Tumblr that I like a lot because I'm also crazy about internet fridge as the author of this Tumblr. And those ghost future keeps being repeated in the press, in the media, and also if you look at things like patents or Google Scholar and you type Star Trek in Google Scholar and Google patent, you would find plenty of papers and patents that from some people who try to create something that is close to Star Trek. And that's interesting, but that somehow leads to some sort of imagination breakdown or some sort of cargo cult. So I don't know if you're familiar with this notion of cargo cult raised by anthropologists like 50 years ago. It's something that those anthropologists noticed in Melanesia when observing population who were fascinated by aircrafts and planes. And those people tried to reproduce those objects like that very nice wooden-made aircraft and waited that something happened like the aircraft would take off with some weird magic, and it never really happened. So there's this kind of impression from, at least from my perspective, that certain tropes from science fiction or certain tropes from engineering keeps repeating that kind of cargo cult. And that leads to some sort of misrepresentation of what science fiction is. And there's this quote by Frederick Paul that I like a lot that says, science fiction, it's not really about predicting things like cars. It's about predicting problems like traffic jams. And that's a weird graphic that I've created with GraphJam that is totally unscientific. But that's my impression when I read science fiction. It's more about the problem than about the technologies. And that's something that I think is very inspiring when we work on a project like design fiction. So I will mention a couple of projects that we did at the Near Future Laboratory, which is a design studio that we founded with my friend Julian Vicker in California and Fabian Jordan in Barcelona. And we do several projects for our clients, and some of them are self-funded. And that one, we conducted this project with Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, and it's about what we call the curious rituals from everyday life, the gestures, the postures we adopt when we use digital technologies. So we did this field research with observation and interviews with people, trying to catalog or collect those kind of examples, all those weird gestures that we do in everyday life, like this old guy in Korean town raising his finger because he thinks that's the right way to have a better signal when using his cell phone, which is totally useless, but he's convinced that would work. You have me waving my hand in a public toilet in Brussels because the light obviously went off because, for some reason I stayed in the toilet for too long, which is part of the science fiction condition that Warren Ellis may have described. So there are plenty of examples like this, which are, of course, funny, but we took that as a starting point to think about how, we did a book about that, and brainstorming about all those gestures and rituals we have with technology and how they would translate with futurist technologies. And for this, we looked at patents, we looked at reports from consultants like Gartner hype cycles and things like that. And our question was like, what would be the equivalent of being nervous with technology, trying to repair your technology, or the gestures that we do nowadays, and translate that into the near future with so-called futuristic technologies. And it led to a design fiction video that I won't show here, but here are some examples of the props or the diegetic prototypes we used to recreate this kind of perception that brain-computer interfaces, gestures, augmented glasses would also lead to certain new rituals that would be interesting to discuss them in a way that is not as sterile as the Corning video that Scott mentioned, as aseptic, as unhuman, or so remote from our daily life. And we were interested in trying to get into the messiness of everyday life. So this guy is trying to use his brain-computer interface, and it does not necessarily work because he's on the street, and there's too much traffic, too much noise, and his attention is diverted by this noise, and it does not necessarily work. So he's somehow shaking the brain interface, or tapping his head because it might help him to focus. And that's something that may look weird, but if we look at how people react today with a technology that does not necessarily work, it's something a bit similar. And we were interested in those kind of projections. We are interested at the Near Future Laboratory. We're interested in material culture, and we did this workshop a few months ago called To Be Designed with designers and science fiction writers. And we started the workshop at the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit, where you have those huge shelves with plenty of objects, like you have the whole collection of Happy Meal toys, or things like detergent packages or old cars. And we took that as a starting point to see how those objects might translate and appear in the future. And we worked on a catalog of fake objects, like those Mongoose tapes or vanity drones that would hover around you to capture videos and pictures of you and upload that on social networks. And our perspective, and it's still an ongoing process, is to create this catalog of, well, gadgets and weird objects from the near future, which would be the equivalent of the Sky Mall catalog. And of course, one can say, okay, this is bullshit, this is funny, it's just a set of weird objects. But if you have read the Sky Mall catalog, you're aware of the fact that it's a very interesting way to read what is perceived as important or culturally curious in a society at a certain moment in time. And we were interested in this format as a way to explore what would be the things that would be curious in the near future and embed that into something physical and material with fake objects, obviously. And the last example I wanted to show is the last project we did called the Green Pages. We wanted to do a quarterly, but it's a bit too difficult to do a quarterly. So it's a publication that we will release twice a year, and it's design fictions meant for not designers, but for professional of fictions, science fiction authors and people in doing movies. And it's a compendium of technologies that could be used in science fiction movies or anticipation of the future. So it's made of pages like this where we describe a certain technology, and that's obviously coming from the patents or the research and development papers one can find on databases. But we translate those into questions or narratives, like those example of storyline and problems that might appear with technology as a way to discuss them in a format that is not necessarily the design fiction video or not necessarily an ethnographic paper about the problems that we may encounter in the near future. So our interest is to use the artifact that we have in popular culture, catalogs, magazines, videos, ads, fake ads, in a way that this is meant to be some sort of representation of how things could be, and to start a conversation about the problems and the implications for society. And the point is not necessarily to predict, or it's not necessarily to convince clients that they should go into that direction or this direction, but it's rather to start a conversation about the implication in a way that is engaging and understandable from a very humane perspective, and then move from there to something a bit more technical or a bit more standard with prototyping and working in tangible artifact we can test with users. And I think that's that was my last bit, and that's
Do you want to swap seats?
Yes, I might do
very
that.
interesting
I'm getting
transition with
a little bit of rage anxiety. Okay,
glasses.
so I don't even know quite what this means now. This was an image I found on The Atlantic, one of their photo blogs, where it's just like a wall of big photos as a kind of illustration of something interesting going on in China. And we're like, so think about Google Glass, some of these surveillance technologies. There are people wandering around today with the new autographer kind of camera, which takes photos automatically as you change from one room into another, or heat sensor detects a change in temperature or light levels or anything like that. And it's like, so why does the Google Glass stimulate this kind of whole great big storm of anxiety and fear when the still camera does so less? And something like this, it's more about bottom-up surveillance, holding people to account. How does this, is it about like symmetry? Does it kind of embed existing kind of power differentials? Those kind of questions are things that seems to be quite interesting. But this image kind of mobilizes a whole different kind of set of ideas and imaginaries around that kind of technology in a way where it's like, so we talk about our future, but who are we asking that question? Is that us here? Is it at a global level? Who are we responsible for? And how does that pan out? So I like to talk a lot about technological progress as a myth. Like the very phrase technological progress is kind of like not just a description of something, but like an instruction where it's like technology progress, exclamation mark. And an attempt where you can kind of draw this kind of grand story of everything where like from the steam engine through to landing on the moon, through like the dropping of nuclear weapons, through to like the internet are all treated as being part of the same kind of thing.
And it always goes up.
And it always goes up endlessly into the future and everything will be wonderful. But if you look at those technological points, they're all really different kinds of technologies. There's nothing that said that it would have to go in this direction even, like standards get locked in for seemingly arbitrary or cultural reasons. People make weird decisions. A colleague told me the story about how when they were planning to roll out the introduction of compressed gas vehicles in the UK in the early 2000s, the main guy who was responsible for mobilizing support from like institutions and stuff ended up having an affair with his secretary and just kind of disappeared, taking the entire kind of network and infrastructure of contacts and like the alliance building with him, and effectively just dooming that technology entirely because there was no one there who could step in and fill the gap. So yeah, like it's not linear. There's no way it's linear. We can't really say that in any way at all. And then within the Google Glass context, it's like, so Glass, find me pictures of tiger heads so I can carve an ice sculpture. And this is a use case that crops up in the actual video, where it's like, so not just hot air balloons and playing ukulele songs.
This is an actual bit of dialogue from the second Google Glass video.
And it's like a blink and you will miss it as well. So it's like, what kind of world are they trying to sell here? Is this about learning? Does everyone secretly want to be an ice sculptor? Maybe that's what it is. And then this kind of stuff comes up as well. And I feel a bit like guilty about publicly shaming whoever this is. But so like the fear and all this kind of anxiety and cultural anxiety around this is mobilized, and it comes up with all these criticisms come out on the internet, and someone reacts being like, Luddites, you guys are Luddites. And this is the future, take it now, just get on with it, for God's sake. But like, and certainly various other points over the last couple of days, this kind of idea of the Luddites has come up. This is the piece that Honor was referencing that I wrote, looking at that in a bit more of historical context. And it's not just that they're anti-technology, it's that they were concerned about the distribution of the gains from new technological development. So it's like their livelihoods were imperiled, and they saw that kind of external force of like capital kind of coming in, where it's like you can get factory machines to do this more effectively. What happens to those traditional livelihoods? They don't get a share of this. So it's the future, take it. But what happens when the future is this? So like, and then within the context of robotics and developments around that, like Nicolas was just saying, we're stuck with an image of a robot from maybe as much as 50 or 60 years ago, where it's like it has a face, it's humanoid, it's an android. There's a company in the States developing a robot called Baxter, which has basically the face of the robot from Moon, the film, which is voiced by Kevin Spacey because it's something that's familiar. And apparently this robot is designed to work in factories alongside humans who will train it and it will do those kind of tasks. But humans need facial expressions to react to, so they've given the robot facial expressions so that its co-workers will know how it's getting on, as a kind of weird form of kind of emotional feedback. And then there's this sign which is pointing in the direction of the National Space Centre in the UK, kind of put cunningly onto the side of like an otherwise entirely straightforward road sign. And that isn't what a rocket looks like anymore either. That's like the rocket from Tintin, Voyage to the Moon. And then we have this. So Glenn Beck interviewing Ray Kurzweil. And as Scott pointed out earlier, the real story here is scrolling across the bottom, where it's talking about the solutions to the US fiscal cliff, take the money from defense and oil. And that goes past. And the rest of the interview unfolds over 90 minutes of these guys just kind of doing jazz hands at each other. And so Nicolas talked a little bit about cargo cults. This is like computers in East Germany and the kind of model of technology that emerges there. Francis Bufford, a British writer, wrote a book in the last couple of years called Red Plenty, which kind of dives into that particular point in time in the USSR where they were looking at cybernetics, and he gives a really interesting look at it's a novel that's ostensibly fictional but relying on lots of factual research, telling the story of this developing idea of kind of technocratic management of economics through computers, and this kind of dream of abundance and plenty. There was a brief period in the kind of 60s and 70s where it looked as if the USSR might get there and achieve this. And so the only way to tell that story is to tell it as it is seen through the eyes of lots of different characters who interact. And it's like no one has the full picture. Sure, we might see this like in the same way as you might see North Korea parading its kind of public display of kind of what its culture is about, traditional culture, values, all that kind of stuff. But in the same way, those kind of technological concept videos are kind of projecting an ideology. No one knows how the East Germans, obviously they do, but within this video you can't intuit how these computers are used or what's going on. They're just there as like totems, artifacts, stand-ins for broader kind of ideas of modernity and progress. And then there's this. So I tend to argue that what's going to be more significant than any kind of ramping up of kind of technological capabilities in a Moore's law way or anything like that is in fact the kind of notion of the next billion coming online and probably interacting directly with us over Twitter or whatever as the developing world begins to take off with an emerging middle class. And it's going to be like we can't now escape the fact that our lifestyles are sustained off the back of others. The kind of emissions we're putting out in terms of climate change are having real direct impacts on people's lives. Like when more people in Africa and India have mobile phones than have toilets, what does that look like? Clearly, that's not just technological fetishism. There is a kind of use there that is more valuable, and they're making these decisions in quite a strategic way. But equally, so the Nicolas Negroponte, Bill and Melinda Gates kind of style of development, where it's like chuck a bunch of tablet computers out of a plane and fly off, and everything will just kind of run itself smoothly, it's clearly not going to happen anyway. So one thing that this makes me think of is like the most recent set of ads for Nokia mobile phones in India. There's a bunch of kind of young, trendy Indian people, but the features that are displayed in this series of ads are entirely different to what we might think of in the UK, where it's like, okay, so you want to have the ability to take stable photos because you might be in a rickshaw and the road surface might be really bad, and you want to have a camera that will work well in low light conditions in case you're dealing with power cuts and stuff like that. And it's like the kind of rhetoric and conversation unfolding around it's like the same mobile phone, but they're playing certain things up and playing certain things down to meet kind of audience needs based on research. Okay. And then there's drones. This was a photo I took kind of semi-covertly at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, DC, where this was being kind of exhibited as, I don't even kind of get it myself now, but it's like part of US space heritage that hasn't really happened yet, or a kind of almost a taxonomy of how this technology is evolving down various pathways and stuff, all laid out there, kind of on multiple levels for you to kind of stand below and be like, or kind of go up onto the balcony and look over, and this is the only time you'll ever see one of these things from above. which is very interesting. But then you just have like loads of kind of tourists and people wandering through taking photos, and kind of it's totally decontextualized from the use case scenarios or whatever political kind of dark matter it's caught up in as well. It's just like the technology is there, whereas in fact what's really important is the pilot flying it from a base back in Kansas or Wales or whatever. And then, along with some friends and colleagues, I did a workshop through the City of London in January when it was cold, and we came across this, which was a bin in the City of London with a screen on it that's advertising supported, and it was showing a news story about the completion of the Shard, and it's kind of edited content, so somewhere out there is someone whose job it is to edit media content for bins. Which kind of blew my mind a bit. And then a news story came up on The Guardian a couple of days later suggesting that bin editor might in fact be located in Spain. And I was just like, I don't know, the world doesn't make anywhere near as much sense as I assumed it did. And so through work stuff, I do a lot of collaborative work with a small design company based in London called Superflux. And again, this comes back to the notion of when we're talking about our future, who are we, what kind of cultural values and baggage do we bring with us? So one of my co-workers in NAB has run a bunch of design workshops around kind of like bodies, prosthetics, augmentation at VCU Qatar, which is a design university out there. And it was kind of interesting, like, so having a piece of paper that they could tag, like the participants could tag with kind of their own thoughts and annotate as a kind of social activity, kind of opened up new spaces of discussion, surfaced people's assumptions and uncertainties in ways that might not have immediately been apparent. And similarly, when it comes to like, certainly we do a lot of work around what happens when technologies make it into the home. And traditionally this would have been relatively straightforward task in the kind of post-war Fordist kind of model where it's like, here, a better washing machine or a new microwave or a new oven. But now that we're starting to enter kind of thoughts around like metadata, kind of systems, infrastructure, the Internet of Things, energy use, and it's not necessarily converging, but it's more of this kind of tangled web. If you want to talk to someone else about that without like you bringing your own assumptions about what this means and them bringing their own assumptions about what this means, you need to kind of have a way to start playing with these things in space or something tangible that you can kind of put there and both point at and be like, what about this, what about that? Otherwise you're just going to be talking at cross purposes. And then this is some photos from the Futures and Innovation course me and Scott taught last summer to a bunch of predominantly American high schoolers in North Carolina, and where we're very much driving at how do we teach like some of these kind of ideas around futures and innovation in a way where it's like, so you have 2 weeks, what do you need, what's going to be something that you can take out into the world and kind of deploy or kind of use in a practical and kind of slightly more pragmatic way. So we got them working on kind of a lot of more practical projects around certain key kind of topics, whether that's like robotics manufacturing or space or health and bio, where it's like, think about business plans as well, think about the kind of, again, the dark matter of like what kind of institution, how's it going to interact with culture and politics and law and stuff like that. Then again with Superflux was looking at the kind of changing roles of women and family structures in the Gulf region. And again, it's like when technology rubs up against culture, like, and that happens as much in Europe as it does anywhere else in the world. It's like, what kind of assumptions, what kind of baggage, what kind of path dependencies and lock-ins do you have to work with? And so we kind of mocked up where it's kind of like, what holds and what does technology change? What is already kind of too deeply embedded to be kind of shifted, and like so if you introduce screens into a traditional family setting, does that allow people to hold kind of traditional family units together even when the people involved are spread around the world? What does it mean about generational conflict or intercutting? So yeah.
You know, I think, one of the, we've kind of blown through a lot of different things, and, a couple of themes have come out. One is obviously we're disturbed. And I mean, like disturbed by what's kind of going on around us, but the sort of handles that we've grabbed hold of are increasingly through design and not just simply taking more of a passive role of doing some research, creating forecasts, and pushing them out to the world and seeing if anyone bites. Nicolas' examples with Near Future Laboratory, the processes that Justin works on at Superflux, what I've done in other sort of forums, and then what we've taught together at Duke is the idea of basically using design as a tool that you can put in people's hands to let them write stories for themselves and not simply take that kind of Space Mountain role of getting into the roller coaster and riding off on someone else's trajectory, but to use the tools and practices of design to effectively, what this session is called, redesign the future, but redesign it in a way where you can interrogate it, where you as an individual, you as a group, you as a culture or society can actually investigate possibilities and make decisions for yourself, and then move to an action instead of simply being shocked by it, which I think there are interests in the world that would rather use that shock and awe to back you off and not have agency, to accept someone else's beautiful design and go off with a smile on your face, or just not to play at all and stand on the sidelines. And increasingly, I think the whole realm of foresight is turning towards design as a new, fresh tool set that we can use to build, construct, simulate, experiment, flex, test, probe, and then decide for ourselves. As Justin said, does this work for you? Does this work for me? If so, let's continue the building process. So I think that's kind of some of what we're picking up there in the end with some of those examples. Gentlemen, any other?
Also, just to note, as a kind of final point from me anyway, is that the future is a moving target. And so if there's one good thing you can learn from design and that translates really well, it's this notion of kind of iterative prototyping, continual movement. The inputs change, and you have to kind of be prepared to drive into the curve as well and go with whatever it seems to be throwing at you.
And yeah, am I on?
Yeah.
And the notion of the future, that's also a problem, because it's not like a meteorite that's going to fall on us. There are several possibilities, and it's up to us to, shape them and participate. Of course, there's a sense that, or a feeling that technology in the general media or in the zeitgeist might be something that is predetermined, but it's not actually the case, and it's up to us to try to reshape that in a way that could be more adapted to our to the various perspectives that we may have. And that's very difficult, and one of the reasons, what you said about design and the role of design in this is that I don't want to put too much strength on designers, but what is interesting in design communities is the idea that designers can take things as something complex and not necessarily go in one direction and try to explore through the iterative process that you mentioned, and that's important. But it shouldn't be just designers. It should be anyone who is interested in trying to have a contribution, and that's sometimes hard to make people understand of this value and this importance to participate, and that's one thing that I'm interested in nowadays.
Okay. I think, to your point, Nicolas, is we're talking about basically, we've heard a lot about open data and open tool sets, open transparency in the world of smart cities. This idea that we need to open up the tool sets of foresight and futures research. That's kind of what I represent, and I think that's critical, is to sort of open those tool sets up, democratize them, push them out to a broader audience to allow that agency that otherwise might happen in a more passive fashion. Open up the tool sets of design in a transdisciplinary fashion so we can all begin to experiment with them. Open up the tools of fiction. Science fiction, as I talked about at the beginning, if misused, can just sort of be an interesting entertainment endpoint, but realistically, it also provides some amazing opportunities and spaces for simulation and experimentation in a kind of psychological sense. So opening all three of those tool sets up, I think, is going to be really key.
And on that note, I'm getting the signal from the back of the room that we're going to wrap up. Is there any urgent, pressing questions? Do we have time for questions? Looking for a sign here. Okay, so I've got 2 minutes for questions. Thanks, Tom. Incredible amounts of insight there, and I think kind of you can start getting a sense that the job of forecasters is not necessarily to forecast weather in the way that weather forecasters do, but to really try and kind of map out the terrain and start observing, kind of what kind of weather is in this context. Observations or comments or questions from the floor? We've got one there. Have we got a microphone, man in green? And then we've got one there just over here, so we'll take both at the same time. Try to make them observations rather than questions.
Okay, so my dad grew up in Manchester in the 30s and 40s. And he died in the mid-80s. So me coming back here for the first time in a long time, I've been wandering around and I'm thinking, what would the city look like to him? And there's a lot of buildings and smartphones, but I would say the biggest difference is I got given an official map of Manchester, and it had the different parts of the middle marked out, and it had Gay Village along the bottom. And I think, like social norms, you touched on it very briefly, but you didn't, not very much. And I think science fiction in general just hasn't really got those changes very, very well in general. So I just wonder if you have any reflections on whether the social norms, how they're going to evolve in the future and how they're going to change design and technology along with them.
Great point. We'll have one more and then maybe some very fast reactions from the team.
Yeah, it's all stole my point. I was going to say, everyone kind of says that the Jetsons is so great and where's a jetpack, all that kind of stuff. But if you actually look at the Jetsons, it's really old-fashioned because the women still have Hoovers and the women are still at home, and and that's the real changes. Is that that's stuff that you cannot predict. The cultural changes. That's the really important stuff. That's stuff that really matters.
I mean, there's a way to tie those two pieces together in one of those last images, briefly. Justin alluded to a project that we worked on together in a Gulf state. Basically, the government was trying to find a way to use fiction, to use design fiction scenarios to model what women's roles, how women's roles could change in the family and how that might be disintermediated by technology, et cetera, so that they could get ahead potentially of social change and adjust policy in such a way that would make that a smoother transition and more favorable to the overall society. So I think that's a really good example of how you actually do pull values quite heavily into the picture. It wasn't really to examine, are we going to use tablets or not? It was about how do we reintegrate children that have gone away to live in another country and come back to traditional society? How does the role of the woman in the household change as technology sort of invades, et cetera? So all of these new tool sets give us an opportunity to model that in a way that potentially can help us not have to go down the road of sudden social disruption or sudden repression and sort of backlash against social change, but to model it safely and see what the opportunities are and how that can be sort of shepherded in more positively, I think.
Great note to end on. So could you join me in thanking Justin, Nicolas, and Scott?